with, because he's the person who in Washington state wrote a writ of mandamus, which was basically telling the government, your elections, they're rigged. They just aren't right. And as an engineer, both of you two gentlemen are engineers, and James as an engineer, basically he couldn't put up with it anymore. So he went to great expense, great effort, wrote this writ of mandamus, and now someone else has taken it up, written it again for all states, and submitted it to the Supreme Court. We are so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being with us, James.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Now, our last conversation, and Michael, welcome.
Hello.
Now, you two are good buddies, and I came in on the end of some of your conversations, text messages and things, and I was so inspired. And then when, James, you pointed out to us the key factor of who was behind the manipulation of our elections, and it goes right back to the British Privy Council, as well as the OPTEC, basically CIA, Jimmy Carter created through Lord Malik Brown and the United Nations in Venezuela, software that is so garbage that anyone at the moment that they're transmitting the numbers through the Secretary of State could stand there with their phone and use PC Anywhere 2.0, intercept that call, change the numbers, and submit whatever numbers you want. That has been proven. It's been proven over and over again, and our system is pathetic. It should be thrown out, and we should go back to a beautiful bipartisan chain of custody, as you've pointed out, and no machines necessary. Now, what I want to go into is the Center for Self-Governance. Have they been aware, because you study their stuff, and I think Michael McKibben has studied some of it too. I've studied some of it that you've sent me. Really great material, incredible material, as a matter of fact. Were they aware before? Is that how you got tipped off to the fact that our elections are so rigged that it spurred you to do this amazing thing that you've done?
They weren't specifically focused in on this and really didn't have the background on it. The Centers for Self-Governance is actually, their focus is to provide the civics lessons on how to be a citizen in a constitutional republic and your responsibilities, which are 24/7, 365, to be involved in your government. That's how the founders, and especially as described, in depth or in total in the Federalist Papers, which are really foundational for the proper maintenance and the construction process of the Constitution, which underpins our republic. Their focus is on teaching people how to be citizens and empowering them to perform their duty. And we define this, or CSG, which is what their acronym is, really focuses on people being excited about participating in their government, and especially at the local level, because if everyone functions properly as they're supposed to and be involved with their local level government, then of course everyone is better off, and in total the republic is actually more secure because you create these boundaries that of responsibility by local people, and you avoid and make it very difficult for tyranny to take hold of the governance process, and therefore the republic is protected by this peer-to-peer type of dividing of their responsibilities, so that the local people who know what their needs are can better express that up through the chain and get better representation. So that's their focus. They empowered me I went through their training to become a better citizen. In fact, I received the civics lesson on it, to how to actually be a citizen, and I've simply taken that responsibility to be involved locally and to take on issues that are really important. That's the long answer. So they're aware of so many indignities to our constitutional republic. It's up to the citizens like myself, like Michael, like yourself, to take on our responsibilities to actually begin to organize and to deal with each of these indignities to make sure that our constitutional republic and the laws as defined and the rights, the first 10 Bill of Rights, are actually properly interpreted. So that was my motivation.
Well, you inspired me so much with just one statement, which we discussed in the last audio we had with you, which was It is the citizens' right to make sure that voting and elections are done properly. I had no idea. I, as a stupid, ignorant citizen who wasn't taking my duties properly, thought that the federal government were a bunch of crooked people because of the fact that they know that the elections are rigged, that the machines are bad, the machines do fractional counting, the machines do all kinds of nonsense. And I had no idea it was my responsibility and that I can stand up to the federal government, who now has shuffled the entire election through Homeland Security, as Obama did before, to make sure that they could adjust those numbers any way that they want. And in a minute, Michael McKibben, would you please address the issue of AVID, ISIS management, and then the election night results, so beautifully calculated that the people capitulate that very night based upon fake statistics produced by AVID, ISIS management, and a group, another company, but they changed their name. Let's just call it Election Night Results Company. And basically they've been manipulating us through the mainstream media propaganda, but also they've been manipulating us through the propaganda, through all kinds of propaganda, subliminal and otherwise, through machines that can be manipulated, and through, of course, the processes of illegal aliens voting, people going across borders and voting in 2 states, dead people voting, people who have no ID are voting. So there's all this corruption going on, and it is my responsibility to do something about it, and I had no idea. And so I feel fantastic that I got connected to you guys and that you inspired everyone through putting this out through Truth News Headlines and Americans for Innovation and all the different groups that y'all work with. And we feel good about that too, because people are awake. They're watching now. They're going to see if these elections are rigged. And Trump wrote an executive order saying he's going to put you in jail if you mess with our elections. And so now we brought it through some good friends to the Supreme Court. And we're saying, look, it is rigged. We need to change the whole system. And we, the people, are demanding this, not we are looking to you, the federal government, to do it for us.
Yeah, that is so true. It is, as a friend of mine says, and I like this, that we have the statute of responsibility, but CSG says that, or the statute of liberty, excuse me, but we need the statute of responsibility to remind us that it's up to each individual to be a citizen, to take on the responsibilities locally first, and to be involved locally, from the school board to the PUD commission to the hospital board to the Department of Health, to be involved in those and to be aware of what your local area needs. That is where most of the work done. That's where the best representation is done. That is where people can affect the outcome through participating in government the best. You have the lowest ratio of elected person to citizens, and if you have the right people in, they can do an effect to a greater degree the environment around you and control it and protect the people better than anyone else. So it's just really pure logic that that is the responsibility for elections and for everything.
Well, James, you think I'm going to get in trouble if I do a citizen's arrest of George Soros for tax evasion? Michael McKibben, will you tell us about man in the middle, fractional voting, and the white hats who made sure to protect those 2 little cells that had the number results for the votes that are then sent in by the Secretary of State? You were so involved in this before. Can you tell our listeners about the way that in the past this corruption has got people elected that we really didn't elect?
Yeah, there are a number of different types of voter fraud, and you've mentioned a number of them. The one that's the most insidious in my mind, as a kind of a big picture technology guy, is the man in the middle, and that one involves a Secretary of State or somebody close to that person allowing a third party to intercept the signals coming from the state boards of election or the county boards of election when they report their votes to the state election tabulator, which is a computer, and intercepts that signal and sends it to a third party, and then that third party looks at the numbers, adjusts the numbers to whatever they want, and then the number is passed on. So the computer at the state level thinks they're getting it from the county when in fact they're getting their data from the man in the middle. That system actually happened in Ohio in 2004. And that is a big, long court case that went from 2005 to 2012. And here's one of the things that I think about court cases. I think we're thinking wrong if we think courts are going to protect our rights. Because here's a good example of where they actually proved this man in the middle existed, and yet nothing happened to any of those people involved in that man in the middle process. The results went for Bush and not Kerry, where the data shows that Kerry should have won Ohio, and yet everybody got off scot-free. So that's one, is man in the middle, and I think that one's the can have the greatest overnight impact because the numbers have just flat out changed. And the only way to stop that is to prevent anybody that's a third party that's not coming from a state board of election from being able to send data to the state election tabulator. And that's where hopefully in this election next week that every sheriff and every state location where the servers are will have data security people there that will prevent any access to that tabulator that's not coming from the actual state board of election system. Not state, the county board of election system reporting to the state. So, for example, in Ohio, there are 88 counties. So there will only be allowed that night 88 entries to the state tabulator. That way you can see a third-party address that isn't the county and therefore block it. And that will help. There are ways to probably get around that, but it will help if that occurs. So it's like a safety ring around the election machine. And what was the other item you mentioned?
Fractional voting.
Oh, fractional vote. That's something that was implemented in the Diebold scanning systems, and it's called fractional voting. And Bev Harris is the one that really has done a great job of exposing this particular software trick. And what it allows the fraudster to do is include in the chip that the election judge sticks into the side of the Diebold machine. It allows the numbers to come out probably as they were entered by the voter, and then the chip, inside the chip, it actually takes those numbers and fractionalizes them to the actual result that the fraudster is looking for. And so it does it in a way, and basically the reason they do that is they don't want to crash these electronic systems, and so they've developed a way to be able to manipulate the numbers without crashing the numbers, which would normally occur when you do that kind of testing. So it's very clever. No one knows it's happening. The election judge can't see what's on that chip and that they're sticking into the side. So when the machine prints out the results, those are the results of the fraudster, not of the actual votes. And this gets at what Jim noticed, that none of these electronic systems can be relied upon because there was no human verifying it. Now, what they did, I recall what they did in the state of Washington, is they have a law which says that the Department of Homeland Security will validate the reliability of the electronic machines in the state of Washington. Now, what's wrong with that idea, Jim?
Well, the idea is, one, it breaks bipartisan chain of custody. Two, you have a federal intervention into a state and election. Plus, you have a third party intervening into a process through a state secret. It produces incurable uncertainty. In fact, that is really the flaw of the Washington state process.
What was your phrase there?
Incurable uncertainty.
That's good.
And it's the if you talk to most of the people, if you just talk to your friends about the voting process, no one here is really sure that they really like it. They don't. Everyone is uncertain. There's this malaise about the voting process, and it's just curious that in this really important election, that the primary here and in our county, that when the third party came in and inserted the software updates, well, just immediately they began to have trouble. So in a real stable system, I mean, like loading software on an airplane that's been tested, and 10 to the 9th in terms, in some critical areas, you just wouldn't have a failure. I mean, you just wouldn't. And yet we did. And it just, was like a godsend. It's like said, okay, here's the truth is this technology is no good, so fail. So what did fail? Well, we don't know exactly. We have some type of report, but it really doesn't tell us because it can't really tell us what happened. And so my fear, mathematically, because I can think through mathematical processes that how you would hack the system, is that in any state that uses pure scanning technology, where you may have a paper ballot that are not counted by humans, and you have a third party updating the software, both in your scanning counter and your tally machine, right before each election, you can mathematically create a statistical probability distribution that precludes who's going to win. This is very easy. And then you can use a process, analysis of variance, to grab these fractional results from, the 34 counties, and pretty soon you have, in a close race, you can count on a 2, 3, maybe 4% delta baked into the entire process, because months ahead of time pretty much who's running, what maybe the vote count that they got last time, what the party got last time, and so you can calculate these distributions and preclude who's going to win. And since the software is self-validating without humans intervening, you have a perfect black box of mischief. And I know it's being done. I can't prove it. They won't let you prove it.
It was proved. It was proved in Ohio. So there is empirical evidence of exactly what you described.
And gentlemen,
and so,
do you remember?
I don't like it at all. It's completely fraud.
Yes, gentlemen, do you remember that before Bush Jr. was elected, there was a man who owned the Diebold voting machines, and he came out in public, and he said if these 5 states will simply, if their state legislature would simply adopt my Diebold machines, I could guarantee that George W. Bush will be in the White House. I put forward the following idea. These different machines, there's about 7 or 8 of them that I can think of, and there's probably more, but the big ones we know, Diebold, ES&S, Interheart Civic, what is it, not Sequoia, Smartmatics, there's a few, 7 or 8 of them. Sequoia, that's the one I was thinking of. Now, basically, the state legislature votes on what machines to use, and they already know who owns those machines and whether they're Republican or Democratic, because I put forward the suggestion that these states are already colored before the election, blue or red. And so the machines are already rigged. And so when they rig the machines to go with the already colored state, it is exactly as you gentlemen said. Statistically, it's like, oh, no big deal. Oh, no, this is what we expected, blah, blah, blah. You expected it because that's what the machines were made to do.
That's where the propaganda from the other thing you asked me about comes in to play, and that is if you're going to precondition people to certain percentages, you've got to be able to control the media narrative to make that happen. And that's where you get into the Avid Leader Plus, the Avid system that's used in most newsrooms actually can push the narrative right to the teleprompter so that the person reading the election night results is just reading whatever the teleprompter presents to them. And what we have now seen and proved is that the Avid software has utilities in it that can be controlled from a central location. So that, and in fact, there have been people that prove that this is true, that you can have the same news being read by readers all across the country in a split second. So on the election night, that's where you really want to control the narrative if you want to be fraudulent. And that's what's been happening. So that fits right into what you're saying there, Douglas.
And they stole the name from you, Leader Plus. And this is the thing that I started to notice, and it's disgusting, folks. Think back. Presidential elections. They're as rigged as the Super Bowl. They're as rigged as any sporting event, okay? There's actually odds in all of them, and the odds makers don't lose, now do they? So they know they're rigged to begin with. But basically, what we're seeing is that we need to stand up and take back our voting rights because we don't have any. What we have demonstrated to the Supreme Court, the Homeland Security, to Michael Pence's committee, and to the state of Washington, if they would have paid any attention, they would have seen that they have no leg to stand upon. And the more that we look into this, the more we see how insidious it is, and that when they start, let's just use an example. They blamed Brad Parscale for using information from Cambridge Analytica. Now, let me explain this, because this is a perfect example of the propaganda we're talking about. At first, Brad Parscale came out and said, yes, we did use Cambridge Analytica. And Trump said, yeah, but when he brought me that, I wasn't interested. And what did he bring him? He brought him some results of about 275,000 people in Britain that had answered some questionnaires. Now, how did that affect our election? But because they tried to bring that out and say Cambridge Analytica manipulated the election, to this very day you see articles that say 87 million people, personal information was gathered by Cambridge Analytica and used to help Trump win the election. Complete lies. The mother company of Cambridge Analytica is Strategic Communications Laboratory, which is ran by Jeffrey Patty and the rest of the nice members of the Privy Council, including Lord Malloch Brown. And he's a key factor there. And so what we're talking about is seeing that this British incursion into our election is not only the machines, it's not only the propaganda, it's the way that at the night that the election happens, they give you false information. Just look at the numbers. They don't tally. Just watch the numbers as they go on the board. They don't tally. And then in the end, they tell you who they choose is going to win, and then the other person, like John Kerry, capitulated. Why did he capitulate? Because he knew that the Diebold machines were fake, that they were fractional voting. He knew that George W. Bush, Baby Bush, did not win, but he capitulated that night because of the propaganda put out by what is now called Leader Plus. I forget the previous name for it, but it's the same company as Avid and ISIS Management. They produced the propaganda that is the only allowed propaganda in mainstream media, except for a little bit of Fox News. So what we're saying is, please, any Republicans out there, do not capitulate on the night that they tell you the false information. Make sure that you wait, and in every single case, ask for a recount. Ask for a paper ballot recount. I don't care if you won or not. Ask for it. Look what happened in the last presidential election. Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton said they wanted a recount. They went to Wisconsin. They found corruption. They went to another state. They found corruption. Then they came to Michigan. They went to Detroit. There were more people who had voted. About twice as many people voted in that election than lived in Detroit. And at that point, they stopped the investigation into the election corruption, and there was no longer a look at the recount to see if there was election corruption. Well, there was, and it was pervasive throughout all the states, and it was ended because the Democrats refused to send in voluntary information from their states. These states that are blue, who have blue electronic digital counting machines to make sure that it stays blue, with false votes, with also in Detroit, double the amount of people voted than even live in Detroit. Adults live in Detroit, okay? This is the type of corruption that still Trump won against. So what I want to say is, viva la Trump and his executive order that says he's going to prosecute everyone to the extent of the law if they meddle in our elections, because we are pointing out the meddling, and I want to see some people be prosecuted.
Well, Douglas, Jim's experience that he's just had and just described today is a perfect example of how broken our government is and why they cannot handle our voting. So Jim gave hard evidence of the problems and the break of chain of custody in the state of Washington. And what did the Supreme Court do? They threw out his writ on procedural matters and didn't pay any attention to the underlying and the important facts that he brought out. So that proves right there that Supreme Court does not care about facts, does not care about voting integrity. All they care about is patting citizens on the head like little dogs and telling them to leave.
James, you're the new president of the United States of America. What are you going to do about the coming elections to correct this problem?
We have to. I have a technology company, and I love technology. I like computers. I like working with it. I can see all of the fantastic things that they can do for us. It's just technology. I really like it. There are some things, though, that it is not worth anything and should be avoided, and especially where it involves the balloting process. It's not worth the expense or the time to use technology to create a tally and to count ballots in an election process. So we have to get rid of the technology. We are not in a hurry for expressing the right of suffrage, because people that we elect in our constitutional republic make huge decisions during their tenure of office. The people that they hire, the people that they oversee, the processes that they create, that affect millions of people. And so we trust them. And so if we have a voting process wherein we can't trust, that means that we do not, in fact, have trust in the people that we elect. And that is really fraught with huge problems, because our experiment, this great experiment of having a republic, is based on trust. Trust your neighbor, trust your people. And so I always say one thing that we learned at bowling is trust but verify. You trust people to do their jobs, to be citizens, but you go through a verification process. So I would get rid of the machines. I would have people show up in polling places and fill out a paper ballot. I would have a citizen volunteer people who are very concerned and interested. It could be done in various different ways. Volunteers, randomize it, have the people that we hire at the county level oversee the process, but not interfere in any way. Just make sure that the citizen volunteers are taking proper precautions according to the rules, and let the people maintain and manage their right to suffrage, because it's so incredibly important that they have confidence in that process. We can't have anything that creates incurable uncertainty. By law, we can't have civil or military interference, which we do now. And we have to let the people breathe. We have to let them have freedom and breathe that freedom. So that's just one of a number of things that I would change if I was, and I wouldn't want to be king, but we would make sure that the election process was clean. One technology that I would use is you can put these under closed caption television, and you can have whiteboards where you put your tallies as they're counted on whiteboards. They're published on the internet widely for everyone to see, and those counts can be verified through phone calls from the auditor. Everyone is seeing them. You save those tapes. Everyone now sees it. It just eliminates fraud. It would be so much cheaper than what we're doing now, and almost foolproof in terms of by exposing it to the public of what's going on. It would be almost incapable of having fraud. So there are many different and very simple ways, but basically people need to show up visit with their citizens, talk about things, quit being afraid of each other, go to the polling places, learn how to be a citizen, make your vote, volunteer, make it a process of freedom, because, it is your freedom and your country that's at stake. And so we need to stop the nonsense and just use some very common sense, simple methods to maintain our republic. So that's what I would do.
Well, I'm going to definitely, you're the election commissioner now. We're going to appoint you the election commissioner. And I'd open up a can of worms and ask you about the Electoral College, but I don't know what you're going to say. So I really like what you just said. I mean, that should be put on a banner, and it should be in front of all of us as we march towards the election polls. And really, we should take back the Republic, and the Constitution should be enforced as it's supposed to be. I want to thank you, first off, from the conclave who's sitting over here, and they're so ecstatic about what the two of you basically have manifested. They put a little bit of aim for truth stuff in the writ of mandamus that got turned into the Supreme Court. So we're excited, but we're more excited about the indictable evidence that is up there from the Americans for Innovation. And without the two of you, Michael and James, there's no way this would have come about. We would have not even discovered OPTEC. We would have not discovered the indictable evidence that can actually turn our elections back over to we the people, instead of having it be controlled by what seems to be extremely partisan digital machines that shouldn't be anywhere in the process. So I want to thank you. I know that Betsy and her team, they're so dadgum excited about what has happened, and they're all thanking you, and we were all so sad that you'd spent so much money in your efforts, James, and your writ of mandamus in Washington, but it is not for naught. It is the baton that's being handed on. And so, gentlemen, Michael, James, one patriot, two patriots, thank you. What you're doing is part of the Second American Revolution. You are reestablishing the